Forgery was not looked upon as an acceptable practice in antiquity, and yet people practiced forgery. Christians practiced forgery from outside the New Testament, such as the Gospel of Peter, the Apocalypse of Peter, the Apostolic Constitutions. But are there any forgeries inside the New Testament? My contention in this book that I've just written, Forged, is that in fact there are books of this sort in the New Testament, books that claim to be written by apostles that were not written by those apostles. Give you just a couple of examples. I've already indicated that writing books in the name of Peter was a wide practice. It was widely practiced even in earlier times. In the New Testament, there are two books that claim to be written by Peter, 1 Peter and 2 Peter. Scholars are virtually unified. With the exception of fundamentalists and very conservative evangelicals, everybody else agrees that whoever wrote 2 Peter, it was not the author of 1 Peter. They have completely different writing styles, which if you read them in Greek, they are as different as if you read Mark Twain and T.S. Eliot. They are very different writing styles. Moreover, almost everybody agrees that 2 Peter was not written by Peter. What about 1 Peter? I don't think Peter wrote 1 Peter or 2 Peter, and the reason I don't think he wrote 1 Peter or 2 Peter is because I don't think Peter could write. What do we know about Peter? Well, in the New Testament, he's a fisherman in rural Galilee. Were fishermen in rural Galilee educated? The answer is almost certainly no. There have been studies of literacy in the ancient world that indicate that at the best of times in the ancient world, maybe 10% of the population could read. Far fewer than that 10% could write, and by write I mean actually copy out letters. Fewer than that could compose, and fewer than that could compose something that was very elegant. 1 Peter is written in highly elegant Greek. The Apostle Peter was an illiterate fisherman. By the way, he's called illiterate in the New Testament. Acts chapter 4, verse 13 says that Peter was illiterate, unlettered. Grammatos is the Greek, unlettered, unable to read the letters. His language is Aramaic, the language of Palestine. 1 Peter is written in a highly literate Greek. Estimates of literacy in Palestine at this time indicate that probably 3% of the population could read in Palestine, far fewer than in the population at large because it's largely a rural area, and reading and writing is taught mainly in urban areas among the aristocratic elite, who can afford the time and the leisure for an education. Peter was not in that group. Now, it is theoretically possible that after the resurrection, Peter decided to go back to school. And he took some evening classes, and as his foreign language requirement, he took Greek. And then he got pretty good at it, and he decided he would take some composition classes, and he got pretty good at Greek composition, and so that at the end of his life, he wrote 1 Peter. I mean, theoretically, it's possible, but it seems unlikely. Now, a number of you are saying, maybe he dictated it and a scribe wrote it down. Maybe a secretary produced it for him. I'm getting some nods. Yes, a lot of you are thinking that because a lot of people say that. One of the things I try to show in my book is that it didn't work that way in the ancient world. This idea that you could have secretaries write books for you, there is no basis for it in the evidence that survives from antiquity at all, even though it's another thing scholars say all the time. Peter probably didn't write 1 and 2 Peter because he couldn't write. There are 13 letters that claim to be written by Paul in the New Testament. Scholars talk about the 7 undisputed Pauline epistles because 6 of these letters were probably not written by Paul. Now, in this case, we have a way of evaluating whether Paul wrote a specific letter. If you've got 7 letters that you're pretty sure somebody wrote, and you've got another letter you're not sure about, you can compare it to the 7. Which is what scholars do. They take the letters of 1 and 2 Timothy and Titus, and Colossians and Ephesians and 2 Thessalonians, and they compare them with the 7 undisputed letters. And in every case, there are wide-ranging differences in writing style, in theology, in presupposed historical situation, in a number of ways that make it pretty clear whoever wrote the book of 1 Timothy, it wasn't Paul. And the same for the other 6. If you add up the numbers, the way it works is this. There are a number of books in the New Testament that are anonymous. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John are anonymous. Somebody later said they were written by Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Now that's not the author's fault, so those are not forgeries. You can make the same claim for the book of Hebrews, which was accepted into the New Testament because church fathers thought Paul wrote it, but it doesn't claim to be written by Paul, so it's actually anonymous. 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John, the name John doesn't occur in them. The author doesn't tell you what his identity is. Those are 8 books that are anonymous in the New Testament. You have the 7 letters of Paul that are really written by Paul, and the book of Revelation is written by some guy named John. He doesn't say which John he is. He just says his name is John, and there's no reason to disbelieve him. He doesn't say he's John the disciple. He's just some guy named John. So that's probably an authentic book as well. So that you've got 8 books, at least, that are certainly written in the names of the people who claimed as their authors, 8 others that are anonymous that are probably falsely assigned to people, and you're left with 11 books that are what I'm calling forged. 6 of Paul's letters, I include the book of Acts, 1st and 2nd Peter, James, and Jude, are not written by the people who are claimed as their authors. 11 books in the New Testament that are probably forged. One of the ironies of this, of course, is that the New Testament is not only the basis of Christian faith today, but has been for centuries, and most of the books of the New Testament celebrate the importance of truth. They celebrate the importance of telling the truth to one another. They celebrate the importance of Christ as the truth, as the true Word of God who came into the world. How can a book that supports truth be based on a lie? How is it that an author who tells people to be truthful with one another, as the author of Ephesians does, how can he say that you are to take up the shield of truth? How is it that truth is important to an author when he's lying about his own identity? Well, this is a very interesting irony that requires, I think, some reflection.